welcome to Table Talks on Today with Paul. Today I'm happy to share with you a book I just finished, a novel by my favorite author of all time, Haruki Murakami. And this one just so happens to be called Tsukuru Tazaki Colorless. Let's get that right on Today with Paul. How about that? Colorless Tsukuru Tazaki and His Years of Pilgrimage. And I'll give you a shot of the back here, and maybe you can see Haruki Murakami there. Of course, he has several books published, and I've read probably 8 of his novels, and one of those books just so happens to also be a compilation of his short stories called The Elephant Vanishes. I actually remember that. How about that? Probably it is the first book I ever read by Haruki Murakami. Tsukuru Tazaki, Colorless Tsukuru Tazaki. There's a theme of color in this book. I got my cheat sheet here, and I didn't write down the colors of the people. Just didn't do it. To find out right here in the novel. So anyways, got Tsukuru Tazaki and the current present at age 36 years old, living in Tokyo, Japan. And he's not really anything spectacular. He's pretty plain and ordinary, if you will. At least that's what he thinks anyways. And what we're doing is we're going back in time to kind of see how his life has kind of transformed to this point. Through some of his years of high school, college, that sort of thing, and even professional career. You know, which seems to be a theme here in my reviews lately. Anyone who's seen a couple of the movie reviews I've done, is this theme of change. This life's always changing, isn't it? And flowing and ebbing, and we move with it the best we can. So same with Tsukuru Tazaki. Starts out flashback to high school, and he becomes a part of a volunteer center. He volunteers and happens to meet some other like-minded folks there who all kind of fall into this group that they sort of kind of naturally fall into, of 5 friends, and 3 boys and 2 girls. You've got his 2 guy friends, Aka and Ao, A-O, pronounce it how you want. And then the 2 girls in the group, Shiro and Kuro. And Aka is the smarter person of the group. Ao is the jock. He's the outgoing, ready to kind of pump people up, physically well built. You've got Shiro, who's just this really kind of mousy, beautiful girl who has a model's looks, that sort of thing. And you've got Kuro, who's, you know, just more so the fun personality, if you will. Not particularly a real stunner by any means, looks-wise. And then you got Tsukuru Tazaki, who feels as though he's completely colorless. And each of his other 4 friends each have a color that their names suggest, where Tsukuru is basically, his name literally means somebody who makes things. And he just feels like as if he's got really no color to him. All his friends are this and that and the other thing, but he's just like this empty vessel. You go down the road, and this flashes back and forth, by the way, quite a bit. So anybody not familiar with the style, anybody who is turned off by the style, maybe you're going to be turned off of this right off the bat. So one day, eventually down the road, everybody's got to go and graduate from high school, and they're going to go off to college. And the only way for the group to stay together is if they all stay in Nagoya, where their hometown in Japan. Well, Tsukuru Tazaki, he has bigger ambitions than that. As far as what's offered in Nagoya at the local universities, and he just so happens to love train stations. And so he's going to go off to Tokyo to learn engineering, specifically in how to actually build train stations. Very specific. And nothing back in Nagoya to support that. And he tries to make it home every chance he can get because he misses his other 4 friends, and they were such a tight-knit group. I mean, it just wouldn't function hardly without any one person being in the group. Well, it turns out eventually he comes home and nobody will answer his phone calls until finally his persistence pays off to where AO finally calls him back. And it's like, here's the deal. You're kicked out of the group. And Sukeru's like, well, why is that? You know, he's like, oh, I'm sure you could figure it out. And he didn't ask anything after that. At that point, he's just accepted that these people who he held so dear to him kicked him out of their life in his sophomore year of college. He goes through a very dark period of time in his life. He hardly ever wants to visit Nagoya, even to see his family at that point. He does it out of obligation. He's living in this beautiful apartment that his father had set him up in, and so he's a really well off college student at that point. He's got this nice beautiful apartment that his father owns, and he's going through this thing to where he doesn't care if he lives anymore, and whenever death comes that he'll be happy to embrace it. And he starts to lose all kinds of weight, and he even feels that his facial features have changed a little bit. Tasty. Thank you. So anyways, one day out of nowhere, through this part of his journey, he ends up meeting this new friend named Haida, this younger student at college. And him and Haida, they have a couple things in common interest. They both like swimming, and so they swim every morning together. Eventually the friendship goes to a point to where Haida's actually spending the night over at Sukuru Tazaki's apartment on the weekends, and they have fun listening to music, having late night conversations, cooking food together. And there's always this one thing that keeps popping up. Here's a theme through the book, is this lists les mal du pays, which is part of the years of pilgrimage orchestration type music, I do believe. And Haida just so happens to have this nice version of it on vinyl LP, and they play that music. It just so happens that Shiro, the beautiful one out of that group of 5, always used to play that song too. And so this kind of has some significance for Sukuru as he goes through life, and this song keeps popping up. And there's this little sidetrack story that Haida tells about his father back in like the 60s, and kind of checking out of college and going to a mountain retreat and kind of hiding out. And he runs into a piano player that also plays a song and tells him about there's this theme of color there again, where this man says that he's destined for death, but the trade-off was he can see the color on people, and shares a story with Haida's young father at the time that there's only certain people who can take past this certain death from person to person, and they have a certain color to them. Well, for some reason, I don't see where it ends up playing much into the book, but it's kind of a nice side distraction in the book. Eventually, Sukuru and Haida hanging out and having fun and all that together, and it becomes normal, and Sukuru's really kind of quite had some fun and getting used to the fact that he has this friendship with this younger student who and it's normal now, it's good, it's nice to have some friendship. Well, all of a sudden Haida disappears, and without a word, without anything. And so finally he comes back into the picture after about a few weeks, says he had to go home and help with the family or whatnot, but then out of nowhere he disappears altogether for good. No explanation. Sukuru Tazaki is that guy who people just dump. He calls himself colorless. He's like an empty vessel. And so past that time with Haida, he actually ends up just going about his business and graduating and all that, even though it becomes rather depressive. He's got really no friends to speak of, that sort of thing. He becomes an engineer, just like he wanted to, for building train stations and renovating them and that sort of thing. You have to have blueprints and all that, and he just loves the trains. In fact, he'll even go and just grab a ticket just to get up on the balcony area of the train station, have a coffee, and watch the trains go. And has an interest in following the schedule and seeing if the trains are on time and arriving and departing and all that. Wow, yeah, real excitement, right? He has a few girlfriends along the way. They don't really get too much into that, but he's had a few girlfriends along the way, but nobody who really knocked his socks off, if you will. Nobody who really tripped his trigger. And so finally one day he meets this Sarah gal who he's starting to see. And we're flashing back and forth with all this, so you have to kind of bear with it. But he's with Sarah. And she finally says, so I really like you, but there's something, I feel as if there's something that is just, we wouldn't last very long, because it's almost as if there's something that you're hanging on to. He never asked any questions about that group of friends breaking up. Why was he just cast out? Like he said, tossed overboard into the middle of the ocean, left to swim in the middle of the night, left to swim to land, and that's how he felt with it. And so he finally tells her about this group of friends. And she basically says, I think you're going to have to deal with this. Before you can move forward, before we can be more than just as casual dating, before I can even go back to your apartment with you and sleep with you again, I think you need to figure this out. And so she's like, here's what I want to do. Give me the names of the people. I'm going to do some research and find out where they're at, what they're doing, and whatever you do with it after that's up to you. So he meets up with her probably no more than a week later. Sarah's really awesome and quick with the research, even though she's a very professional, busy lady, entertaining clients at night and all that sort of thing even. Not that she's a woman of the night, mind you. That's a big difference there. Whining and dining clients, So she gives them a list and tells them a little bit about each of them. Aka is and AO are both living in Nagoya still. And Aka just so happens to have this company that trains employees to be better employees. Some sort of real crazy, like inspirational, kind of. I don't know. I don't want to go too crazy and say something like Tony Robbins, but it feels a little bit like that, except for more corporate type stuff. And so he gets hired for those sorts of things. You got AO, who is a salesman at the flagship Lexus dealership in Nagoya. Yeah, they just introduced the Lexus dealership there, and he's the number one salesman in all the country, so how about that? Shiro? Yeah, she's dead at this point. She died 6 years before. And Kuro, she met a man, moved to Finland, lived in Helsinki, Finland in particular. So Sarah hands him the information, says, hey, here's the deal. Whatever you do from here out, that's up to you. And he finally decides, I think she's right. I'm going to go out there and search for some answers. It's been, 18 years since he was kicked out of the group, maybe 16 years. I think it was 16 years. That's right, sophomore year in college, I've been 20. Look at me, I can do math. So he does seek these people out, and he starts as close as possible. And he heads to Nagoya. And he has a talk with AO first at the Lexus dealership, and he shows up unexpectedly just to make sure that these people will actually see him. And they do. They take a walk in the park, and he finds out the reason he got dropped out of the group was because Shiro claims that she spent the night at Sukeru's apartment one night and that he raped her. And come to find out that it was Kuro who really pushed the guys to say, hey, we got to kick Sukuru out of the group for Shiro's own good. And she pretty much passed it on to them that this story was true and all that. But looking back, AO even says that was not you. That's not the kind of person you were. And Sukuru's obviously taken aback because she never even ever visited him in Tokyo while he was in college, ever. Moves on to meeting Eika at his headquarters for this training company that he has set up. And AO even tells him, says, me and him don't really hang out so much anymore. It's not that I don't like who he is anymore. It's just I don't like what he does. And so, turns out Sukuru meets Eika, and it sounds like it's one of those cool new places where everything's really brand new, looking sleek and chic in the offices. I mean, just like they got all the window dressings on this place, and he's just one of those guys who's real slick and all that with this. He's not even the face of the company anymore. If it were, he has other people do that. He's behind the scenes. And so they're talking, and it's funny in this circumstance, it's actually Sukuru who actually wants to exit the room first, and Eika can tell that. Eika has a couple cigarettes while they're sitting there talking, and even he admits there's just no way that you would have ever done that to Shiro. And of course, Shiro's dead. She's buried. And nobody can quite explain why she decided to move off to some smaller town outside Nagoya and not really doing much at this point with her life. And for some reason, she ends up being strangled in the middle of the night one night. And that's how she died. And nobody told Sukuru because they figured he would have seen it in the papers somewhere. So yeah, they know him that well that he should be reading papers because they hadn't talked to him in how many years. Finally, ends up booking a plane ticket to Finland. Yeah, even Sarah's kind of going, you're really going to book a plane ticket and not even see if Kuro is available at her home or anything like that. You're just going to fly off to Finland, huh? So now I got this lady out there who's a friend of mine, his contact if you need any help. And he ends up flying out. And this lady really helps him out quite a bit because it turns out Kuro and her husband are not at their home in Helsinki. They're at a vacation home they spend the summers at. Turns out to be about an hour and a half away from Helsinki. So he gets there, has a hard time finding it. It's like out in the sticks, out in the middle of nowhere. Husband's there. She's out for a walk with their 2 children. And he speaks Japanese because it turns out that her husband, actually had wanted to go to Japan to learn pottery because he says he's a potter, first off. He makes pottery. But second off, he says you have to start in Japan, or that's the basis for all good pottery. He says if you don't start there, then you go nowhere. So that's where he went in his younger formative years, and that's when he met Kuro. And they happened to develop a relationship and have a nice family in Finland. Kuro comes back, and you're thinking, oh boy, she meets Sukuru for the first time in 16 years. And you know the story, you know she backed up Shiro and had the fellas even push him out of the group. But it turns out a little bit of nervousness, a little bit of tension that makes the reader think that, oh boy, this is going to be quite the meeting. Turns out she's comfortable being around Sukuru, and the husband and the kids go off to town to get some supplies, even with the family dog. And that's when Kuro reveals that actually Shiro was very mentally unstable, and even she couldn't believe Sukuru would do such a thing. But she was doing what she thought was the best for Shiro because she was so adamant that it had happened, and in fact was pregnant based on the rape. And in fact, she reveals that it hurt her a lot because she actually really liked Sukuru a lot. And it saddened her that to do the best thing for her one friend was to shut out the person that she possibly even loved the most. But she also said it was because he was a strong person and she knew he could handle it. And also, as revealed, as much as he seemed to feel so colorless and featureless and all that, for some reason, to his astonishment, and Kuro being the key one to say it, everybody's telling him that he was the handsome one in the group. He didn't really think much of himself at all. But it's amazing what other people think about you that you don't even know. They have a good hug and a couple tears while they're listening to the Le Mal du Pays, because he asks her if she remembers Shiro playing that. She says, of course. In fact, I have a copy right here. They have a nice little hugging session where they just kind of get things out of their system after so many years of built up I don't want to say animosity, but built up feelings about how things had gone down, and just to be confronted face to face. And so there you go. He's got his answers and he knows what the draw is, and he went through all that pain for how many years, all that feeling lost or unwanted and all that, and he goes back to Japan. Spend some time at a train station. There's one thing Kuro said to him before he left, and he talked about Sarah to her a little bit. She said, here's the thing. You can't let this woman go. You need this woman. And for some reason, she says, if you let her go, I don't think there'll be anybody else. It's kind of a strange thing to say to somebody you ain't seen in 16 years and you don't really know him that well. Maybe she just seen something in him. Maybe she just knew. Women's intuition, right? So he goes back. He can't wait to see Sarah. He has a suspicion that she has somebody else because he's seen her before he left for Helsinki with an older man, and she was so happy. And it was just out in public, a random passing. She didn't see him. He was buying some gifts for Kuro's children for when he arrived. Just a couple little treats from Japan, a little taste of home. So he'd been thinking about that during his trip. And he gets home. He really wants to call Sarah. And I guess he figures out after what Kuro said, this time just to grab the bulls by the horn. Nut up or shut up, as they say. And he calls her, and she tells him that I'm going to have to call you back. I don't know if I love you or not. That's an answer I'm going to have to call you back on. Talk to you in 3 days. Just give me 3 days. By the second day, he needed to call her before 4 a.m. He just couldn't hold out and wait, and I think a lot of us guys know that feeling where we're like, nervous anticipation. She finds it sweet that he couldn't wait to call her, but like she said, just give me till the appointed time, like I said. And it is good to hear from you. Finally, the next night, he ends up calling again, but realizes he shouldn't, and hangs up. He has him an adult beverage. He's not a drinking man, really, not really. He always had a shot of whiskey before he went to bed. That's his habit. But he ends up hanging up the phone, and the phone rings, and he questions whether he wants to answer it or not while he has music playing in the background. I'm pretty sure it was the Years of Pilgrimage album. and he doesn't answer. And it rings a second time, and he doesn't answer. And the book ends with him going to sleep, and poetically put that the light kind of fades in the back of his head as he tends to fall asleep, like the sight of a train going out and fading into the darkness at night. And similarly to the movie Kicking and Screaming, this book basically ends with, we don't know what happens next with Sukuru, and we do not know what happens next. But he did go down his journey, he found some answers, and he has a woman that he loves. He never felt the way he did about anybody else until this time. So we're left wondering. There you go. I guess the point is his life is full of, it's an open-ended book, right? Never know what's going to happen next. You never know where the story's going to take you. So I want to thank you for joining me on this journey here on Today with Paul. Here's a shout out to Haruki Murakami, my favorite author of all time. Yeah, I love Chuck Palahniuk too. Love the movie Fight Club. But the next book I'll be reading is After Dark by Haruki Murakami. Who knows, there might be a review of this. Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, we'll see what happens. Always need something to talk about on Table Talks on Today with Paul. So anyways, I want to thank you for sharing, liking, and subscribing as always. And of course, I hope to catch you next time. Peace.